Like, oh no,
What?
I haven't lined up the. Hold on.
Yes.
You can.
Hey
Very,
guys.
very professional start.
Very professional. Hey guys, Craig or Crafty from Craftworks Distillery, and this is Aussie Craft Distillers Shooting the Shit. This is our little podcast where we have a wee chat to people in the industry, whether it's distillers, cooperers, whoever's in the industry. And so tonight, our guest is Dave Pearce from 5nines down in South Australia. Why am I looking up? I should be looking.
I don't know. Yeah, down here, right here.
I'm down. Yeah, just down here.
Now I can see you. I don't know what was going on. It's very different to the setup I've got in the shed. Anyway, Dave,
how's it going, guys? Yeah, going well. Going really well.
Good, excellent. All right, so Dave's with us from 5nines. We've got the Todd up in the top left-hand corner. G'day, Todd.
G'day.
How are you?
Oh, fantastic.
Very good.
You are not in your usual den.
No, I got kicked out of my den because my daughter decided to move back into it. So it was
a
short-lived man cave. But
oh, wow.
Yeah, right. That's unfortunate.
You only just set it up.
I was getting so excited about down there too.
That was going to be home away from home.
Home within home.
Home within the home, yep.
Within home. All right, and then we got Luke.
I'm here. Hello.
Luke's here, and I'm at Luke's place, and we're going to do a shooting the shit tonight. That's the plan. So, first things first, need a drink. So, currently, I'm on a Riverborn down there. Riverborn Identity.
Nice.
And for a change, having it with a...
Oh, yum. Yeah, that would be good.
Long range soda. Yeah.
I managed to find it at a local bottle. I'm like, I'll take that.
It's hard to find.
It is hard to find. It's good stuff.
And then after that, Luke's got a bottle of this, so I'm going to switch over to this.
Ah, nice.
And I don't think I've actually tasted your whiskey, Dave.
Get out. No, you have before it was whiskey. Yeah,
correct.
You're right. I've
tasted it in your Bond store, but I don't think I've actually ever tasted it in a bottle as single malt whiskey. So I'll be tasting that tonight. So I'm looking forward to that.
It's all right.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. All right. So what are you drinking, David?
I'm drinking a relatively new release called our Hills Cask, which is, there we go, which is actually a blend of predominantly 3 different styles of barrels. So it's a vatted release, so predominantly bourbon, a Pera, and a really interesting barrel out of Clare Valley, which used to have altar wine in it. So sweet red wine used by the Catholic Church for Holy Communion.
Right.
So there's a winery up in the Clare Valley called Seven Hill Winery, and they make 95% of all the altar wine for the Catholic Church, and have done for 4 generations of Catholic priests, or actually Jesuit priests. And so there's this just amazing history in this winery, and we managed to secure a bunch of these altar wine barrels. Some of them had altar wine in them for the last 30 or 40 years. So,
wow.
So just incredible depth of flavour coming out of these, and sort of this real luxurious sweetness coming out of the barrels. So, so we've blended some into this vatting, and we've also done a single cask release with the altar wine as well. And it's a really good drop.
Wow, yeah. That's something a little bit different for sure.
Oh yeah, it's just something unique to our region.
At the Whiskey Live, was it? It might have been, and I think you were telling us about the altar wine variation, and that was one of the ones that stuck with me from the day. Thought that is an interesting story.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting story and just a really interesting whiskey. And it's interesting because we got three different styles of barrels. We got some that was aged in American oak, some that was in, French oak, and then some that was in this really unusual one, which our cooper hated when we took him to him. But it was this German oak, and I'd never even heard or seen German oak before. And when we took it up to Andrew Stiller, our cooper up in the Barossa Valley, he sort of shouted and goes, "Oh my God, what have you brought me?" He said, "This is horrible for me to work with." He said, "It just leaks like a sieve." And so I think he took 10 barrels and managed to make 3 for us. But the whiskey is just ultimately unusual and really interesting. So we will release some that's come out in this German oak within the next year or two. But we had them made up into couple into 225s and then one into a 300-litre barrel. So we'll see how it goes over the next couple of years. But it's tasting delicious already.
Very nice, very nice.
So how long have you had barrels laid down for now?
We started laying barrels down early in 2017. So we sort of started distilling very early in 2017 and sort of had our first barrels down by, I think, March-ish. So we sort of started off with mostly small format 100-litre barrels, did some 20s for private investors and such. But the majority of our stock to begin with was all 100-litre barrels. And that was just predominantly where we're situated. Like this distillery started off in my garage at home, a 2-car garage turned into a distillery. And, the bond store was a shed down the bottom of my hill. So, and we wheeled every barrel down on a sack truck. And so 100 litres was about as much as Steve and I could manage, especially in the wet. You'd be slipping and sliding with this, converted hand cart that laid down on its back with 4 wheels that you could wheel it down the hill. And then Steve built this sort of hand crank that we could lift the barrels up and put it up into and stack them up on stillage timbers. But it got us started. So, we managed to fill up this sort of 9 by 9 meters long by 5 meters wide shed. We managed to fill that up over about 2.5 years, and then started stacking barrels and moved to a larger format, which is where we moved barrels down to Steve's cabinet making workshop. So we had that registered as a bond store. We filled barrels on the back of the ute and drove them straight down, and then lifted them off with a forklift down at his cabinet making factory and stored them there for a couple of years, and then finally we've now sort of about 18 months ago we've moved out of the garage and we've rented a space at the back of another distillery, Mad Monkey Distillery in Adelaide, who are a rum distillery.
Right. Yeah.
Alec and Scotty, great couple of guys. Alec's a super talented distiller. And they had some spare space, which had just been vacated by a barrel broker.
Yep.
And we took over their space. So you might remember Round Oak Barrels, Gareth from Round Oak. So he was sharing their shed. So he had a bit of a tough time during COVID and, moved out. And so we took over his space. So we've only got still a relatively small space. It's only 250 square meters. But we've been able to ramp up production now, so we're brewing twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week, and the still basically runs 24/7 these days.
And have you changed? So from when you were in your 2-car garage to now, have you changed stills?
No, still the same still. It just runs a lot more frequently. We did up the scale of our fermenters. So previously we were brewing once a week on a Saturday morning, because Steve and I still have day jobs. So we would brew Saturday morning. We'd start at 6, finish at 6. We'd do 2 mashes in a day, in a 1,000-litre mash tun. We'd end up with about 3. Yeah, it's a big day, and then so we'd end up with about 3,000 litres of wash. And then that would sit there and ferment for a week, and then I'd spend the following week distilling it all. then it was just empty in time for the following weekend to brew again. So we just had this cycle of sort of constantly keeping those fermenters full of wash, ready to distill the following week. So it was pretty busy.
What is your still?
1,000-litre pot still that Steve and I built ourselves. So
Oh wow!
So we started sort of looking around for stills in probably late 2015, and just couldn't find anything without a 2-year wait. And so we said, well, let's design one and build one ourselves. So Steve taught himself how to TIG weld copper, and both of us rolled and beat and swore and burnt ourselves and whatever else over about 3 months, and managed to make our stills. So
wow,
you're very relaxed, David. You're very relaxed, and I've known you a few years, and it's fascinating because your story is, a lot of people would be incredibly stressed because I know how you started, I know how you've grown, and I know how you maximize utilization of your space, and it was phenomenal what you managed to squeeze into your 2-car garage, and it was just incredible. Let's go right back to the start, but before we do, we didn't ask Todd what he's drinking. What are you drinking, Todd?
Oh yeah,
I'm just going with the old
Gospel
Solera rye.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice. I love their rye.
Yeah.
I've been really enjoying it as well. So
Cool. It's got a real cold tea thing going on, I find. That rye. I really like that. So
I just added a bit. Sorry, I just added a bit of the long rays dark soda to the 5nines. That's so good.
Yeah, I'll try that shortly.
That's a good mix. Helps to have a good base. The dark soda is quite nice. So,
Mr. Young's on.
Yes. Hey, Youngie.
Andy, how are you?
I owe him a phone call and a message or two. Okay, let's go right back to the start. So, how did you and Steve meet, and where did your love of whiskey come from, and what made you decide to have a crack at it, making it?
Yeah, well, there's 3 very distinct questions there. So Steve and I met through my son and our wives, basically. So our 2 sons basically started kindergarten together. Our wives were best friends, and then so Steve and I just sort of got to know each other through our wives, and just liked hanging out. And then we both found that we enjoyed drinking, and particularly enjoyed drinking whiskey. So it just kind of went from there. So been knocking around as mates for probably only about 8 years. I would say might be 9 years, but yeah, actually it's probably closer to 10. Actually thinking about it, but yeah,
Time for an anniversary.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess my love of whiskey, I guess it started young, right? I probably wasn't even of age, and I started drinking whiskey because I just didn't like beer. So, the old thing back in the day was, you drive to the bottler, you take the P plates off the car, you drive through the bottler, and 3 bottles of whiskey. It was one for me, one for my mate, and one for the girls. And just sort of gradually over the year, my taste matured as my budget allowed, right?
Yeah.
So, you started off drinking as cheap as possible, and then you gradually progress through the range of different whiskies, and yeah, your taste just matures and you learn more. And I think I actually learned more about whiskey after I actually became a distiller. You just learn so much when you actually talk to people in the industry, talk to your customers, and actually get in and make it. Just learn so much. I wouldn't say I was any sort of whiskey expert before I started making it, to be honest. I still don't profess to be a whiskey expert. I just love making it.
It is good fun.
It's just great.
And getting into the process of distilling and starting up your own distillery, were there any sort of influences that you could say, yeah, that's sort of the direction I wanted to head in?
Oh, look, it started sort of as a bit of a, I'd spent about 7 years commuting backwards and forwards with my day job. So my day job is IT, and I'd spent 7 years commuting every week backwards and forwards from Adelaide to Sydney to work for one of the big banks. And, I had a very senior role there and had just basically had a gut full of all the travel. And Steve and I had actually just come back from a trip traveling around Tassie on holidays with our families, and we'd tried to visit as many distilleries as we could in a week without sort of taking away from the family holiday too much.
It's a hard balance.
And I'd been sort of doing a bit of hobby distilling and just trying to learn, and just kind of I really love the technical aspect. I mean, my job in IT, I've been in IT engineering for 30 odd years, or 35 years actually, and just loved the technical aspect of distilling. And sort of as we toured around Tassie, I just looked at what these distillers were doing and thought, wow, these guys are having a really good time and they're making great booze. And it's like, I wonder if I could turn my hobby into a job. And sort of one night I was just sitting back in my apartment in Sydney, and just sitting there alone because your family's back in Adelaide, and you can't go out on the piss every night. So I'm just sitting back and watching TV and just pondering, and thought, I wonder if I could start a distillery. And so I just started doing some research, and just looked at the regulatory side of things, and didn't really have anyone to talk to, but I just started doing some research and found there was a phone number you could ring at the ATO. So I rang them and had a chat to them, and they were super helpful. And you got to do this and that, and you need to write a business plan. I was like, okay, all right. So I sat down and spent 3 months writing a business plan, and I was just going to have a crack at this myself. And then one night, Steve and I were about halfway through a bottle of Sullivan's Cove, and that was back in the days when you could actually afford to buy it. Yeah. And I said, hey, Steve, I'm starting a distillery. And well, my wife nearly fell off her perch because I hadn't told her. And Steve sort of, mate, you're not starting a distillery without me. Let's do it. So I just sort of went from there, and I showed him the business plan, and the business plan was very modest. It had me sort of buying 100-litre still and starting from there, and producing whiskey at a very modest rate. And we just kind of built it from there. After about sort of 6 months after that, we'd sort of researched what we're going to do around stills. The ATO said we had to, when we looked at the excise form, the excise to get our producer's license, you had to be able to show where you got your distilling skills. So we went and did a course down in Redlands, which is now Old Campton. So Dean basically ran us through a course for 3 days. I managed to negotiate a redundancy from the big said bank, and part of the redundancy package was we will retrain you. And so I think they expected me to do some kind of IT course, but I gave them a distilling course down at Redlands, so they paid $5,000 for Steve and I to do a distilling course. HR just laughed their asses off. But so we did the course down there with Dean, and that just sort of gave us a little snippet of knowledge that we could get started. And sort of then basically from that, we sort of just learned on the job. Basically, we built our mash tun, we built our still. Crafty saw the original distillery set up in the garage, and we had so little space that everything was on wheels except the still, including the mash tun. Yes. Because the rules were I was allowed to use the garage as long as my wife could get her car in there during the week. Everything had to fit in half a 2-car garage. So, our grain hopper was built up in the rafters, and we had a set up to get the grain up there a bag at a time, and it was just one of these things the things you do, and I'm really lucky to have a business partner like Steve, who is super handy. He's a cabinet maker by trade, but he's been building things all his life. Right? He's been self-employed since he was 17, and just loves to build stuff. He can weld, he can build stuff out of timber or whatever. So And look, luckily I'm pretty handy as well. You know, my dad was a boiler maker and a tech studies teacher, so I sort of learned to build stuff from as soon as I could walk. So, you know, it comes super handy when you own a distillery, because stuff breaks and stuff's expensive to buy. So you just build it yourself if you can. So, yeah, but yeah, and look, I am pretty relaxed, Crafty. I have a very stressful day job. And if I find if the stress gets to you too much and you worry about stuff too much, that it'll just overtake you. So I tend to be pretty relaxed. So
Be
yeah.
you there.
Otherwise, it just takes over. Look, I've lost enough hair already. I can't lose any more. So there's no point stressing about stuff.
That's a good outlook, mate. It's a very good outlook. So the business evolved, and you know, I remember going into your bond store a few years ago at the bottom of your property, and you told the story how you rolled barrels down. And I thought one day you're going to have to pull those barrels out. That's going to be fun. How was that?
Brutal. We still haven't got them all out. There's still 50 down there. So, look, Steve and we've actually hired a young distiller now, Ben. And I'll tell you a bit of a story about Ben in a minute. But yeah, luckily he's super fit, and he's got a couple of super fit mates that actually like the challenge of moving them up the hill, because you know, they're young, fit, and just like the fitness aspect of doing it. So to do 3 or 4 or 5 hours moving barrels up the hill, they go, oh, that saves us going to the gym. So whereas Steve and I will do about 2 hours and we're just absolutely exhausted and can't walk the next day. But you know, anyway, we're in our 50s, they're in their 20s. So yeah, but it's literally, you got to get them up like a sled dog. So same device we use, which is a converted sack trolley. You tie a rope to the front, you put a barrel on it. One person puts the rope around their waist and runs up the hill, and another person guides it. It's
yeah, you can keep that.
it's hard work. Yeah,
we keep that. That's
we brought a couple of 100 barrels up so far, and we got 50 to go. So yeah.
It reminds me of when I first started. I wasn't brewing, so I worked with a local brewer, and then I wanted to move to brewing, and I moved quite quickly to brewing. And I was thinking, I've got no space for a mash tun. I didn't have a mash tun, and I thought I have no space for a mash tun. And Mark Burns from Burns Welding Fabrication said, mate, give me a boat trailer. And we'll weld it up, and we'll put a mash tun on a boat trailer. We'll reposition the axle so it can actually pivot and you can pull it around. And so for 3 years, I would pull the boat trailer in and out of my shed. I would do my mash, and then I'd pull it out and I'd hose it down outside. And I look at it now and I go, that was madness. It's hard enough just doing what I do now, let alone doing that. So, yeah, the things you do when you start, when you're super high in motivation and resilience, and nothing's hard. But as things go along, things get harder, and you look back at some of the things you do, and you went, it's just crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It was fun at the time, though. It's sort of, and it's great stories and memories about how you started the business, right? It's just,
exactly.
I mean, not all of us are lucky enough to sort of have buckets of money to just throw at a business and get it going. So you know, you make do with what you've got and build it. So, and I think it makes it all that more rewarding when you actually, hopefully, one day I'll be able to give up my day job and actually just work in the distillery. But yeah,
it makes some money in this game.
Yeah, well, that'll be nice too. But
yeah.
It's starting to turn around. But
bonus, isn't it?
What, making money?
Making money in it. You just do it for the love.
You'd like to think you make money at some stage. So, what's been your challenges in the early stages, and what's your biggest challenges now? Are they quite different challenges?
Look, I think the challenge is always selling what you've made. And that's even a challenge now. It's sort of becoming less of a challenge. We're sort of getting a little bit more known and starting. We've been really lucky that we've picked up some export sales into China and into Singapore, which has really helped us cash flow wise.
Wow. Yeah.
And that just came about from one of the whiskey shows actually in Melbourne. I met a young guy who happened to be a wine exporter. His business had died because he was no longer able to export wine into China. And he just said, "Look, I love your whiskey. Are you interested in exporting it into China?" I said, "Sure, let's talk." And he said, "Oh, well, look, let me just do a small order to start with. I'll order 500 bottles." And I go, "Well, that's not a small order for us. That's and he sent it to China, and yeah, it was really well received. And he's come back since, and ordered a couple more pallets, and so it's gone from there. And then he rang us, a couple of months ago and said, "Look, I've got a mate of mine who's really interested in your whiskey in Singapore. Do you want to send 1,000 bottles to Singapore?" So we go, "Yes, of course we do." So so we've just sent that off to Singapore. So hopefully it'll be really well received there. So
yeah, wow.
So I think hopefully it'll just let us get a bit more scale and sort of pump more into production. I mean, I guess at the moment we're still trying to scale the distillery from, we're still quite labour intensive. We've only got 1,000 litre still. We've bought all the copper, and we've bought a big boiler to be able to scale up. So we've got copper to build a 3,500 litre wash still.
Right.
Steve needs a bit more spare time to be able to build it at the moment, but yeah, that's the next plan. Is just get to that next level of scale. Yeah, but look, selling is the hard thing, right? And finding a good distributor. We've been really lucky that we found. We've been working with Mind Spirits Co. Out of Melbourne.
Yeah.
And so, just getting our product to where it was easier for them to sell. So, when we started out making whiskey, we deliberately chose a lot of different styles of barrels, and part of that was us learning how our sort of spirit aged in different barrels, and which barrel it worked best with, because some people's spirit works really well in red wine barrels, ours doesn't. And just kind of work out what we wanted to, what sort of whiskey we wanted to produce, and then I guess, so unfortunately what that meant is when we came to release our whiskey, we only had very limited numbers of different types of barrels, and so we ended up doing lots of single cast releases.
Yeah.
And the distributor, he loved the whiskey, but it was really hard to sell because they were only, 110, 120, maybe 130 bottle releases. And so by the time he educated his salespeople and educated his customer about that particular release of whiskey, the salespeople had to work hard to get it into, say, a whiskey bar, and they'd buy 2 or 3 bottles. And then they'd ring back, 3 months later and say, "Oh, can I have another 3 bottles of that?" And it was a release that was sold out by then. Yeah. And so then the salesperson's got to go back there and say, "Oh, here's a new 3 releases. Which one do you like?" And give them tastings and all that sort of stuff. And it's really hard work for a salesperson. What a salesperson needs to make money is go and do a transaction, educate someone on a product, and then just getting repeat orders. And so the Hills Cast that I'm drinking tonight is that. So we've done about 3,000 litre. We've blended up 3,000 litres into a big vatting.
Yeah.
And the idea is that we'll then be able to give consistent releases. We don't bottle it all at once. We just bottle it 800 bottles at a time. And so the idea is then be able to give consistency of product. And so once that batch gets close to used up, we'll then blend another batch. We'll blend another batch so that it tastes very similar. And so we'll still do single cast releases. Some of the casts we just open up and it's just spectacular by itself. So we're going to put that in a bottle, right? We're not going to vat it with others. But we're just trying to get some consistency in whiskey to make it easier for our distributor to sell and then get repeat orders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The planning must be quite difficult to know, have that consistent stock to create your blend.
It really is. Yeah,
and
it really is.
That going over years.
Well, you're making those decisions. That's the big challenge. You're making those decisions years in advance, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No,
and we deliberately built this blend based on what we thought we had the best stock of over the next 3 to 5 years. So because we wanted to make sure that, and we're hoping people like it, and luckily so far people have from the whiskey shows we've gone to, but yeah, we're hoping people like it because that's the majority of the stock we've got. And so it's fortunate that we've built our vatting around those particular barrel styles.
And that is bourbon.
That is the Hills
and the Alta wine.
Yeah, that's right. And look, there is a couple of other unusual barrels in there. There's a bit of Chardonnay barrel and a little bit of Tawny barrel in there as well. But they're the three predominantly barrel styles in there. And it's actually it's a really interesting exercise for us to go through and actually try and build that, blend that consistency into a vatting. It's actually harder than you would think. It's
I think it would be incredibly difficult personally, and I think I don't think there's enough appreciation of what goes into the work that goes into a vatting like that and creating that consistency across years. To me, that is actually much more impressive than I lay down this barrel. It came out really good. I'm going to put that in a bottle. The blending aspect, there's a real art and science to that.
Well, the big challenge with that is you've got to have the stock behind it. Right?
Absolutely.
It's
the stock, the planning, the foresight, the consistency of new make, consistency of barrel. Props to you for being able to achieve it.
Are you looking at any sort of Solera type approach?
No, so we're not. So it's all just, we basically draw samples from probably 50 barrels at a time. Anything we think, Ben actually wanders around the bond store and tastes probably 100 barrels, and he'll pick 50 that he goes, yeah, that's actually a nice whiskey by itself.
Right.
We then line those up in 200 ml samples along a bench, and then go, right, we need an element of this, we need an element of that, we need an element of that to give the base characteristics.
Yep.
And then there'll be some other oddball barrels. So, there'll be some Chardonnay barrels or, some Frontenac barrels, and we'll go, okay, we want to ring fence those because we'd like them for single cast releases. And then basically just start blending and going, and then generally we'll do some things independently. So Ben will sit down and he might do 2 blends, and then Stephen will come and at a separate time and he'll do another blend, and I'll come and do another one, and then we'll all taste them all and we go, all right, so this one is the closest to our sample, this is our last release of that vatting. And then go, okay, what do we need to do? What flavour is it missing? And we take all 3 of our independent opinions and we'll taste it over a number of days, because what we find is, sometimes you've tasted too many whiskies that day, or I don't know, you've eaten the wrong food, or I don't know, your palate's just fatigued for whatever reason, and you taste different things over different days. So just trying this. So it's a bit of not a particularly scientific thing, but it's just persistence around trying to go, now I come back and go, actually, this is very close. It's not exactly the same, but hell, we're a craft distillery. We're not producing, 500,000 litres a week.
Variation allowed. Yeah.
That's right. But people still pick it up and go, all right, this tastes like the Hills cask.
Yeah.
So that's what we're aiming for. I guess our customers will be the judge of that. But
and then, sorry, how do you go from like your 200 ml samples where you're adding a couple of drops of this, a couple of drops of that, and you're blending it all together, to then scaling that up to 1,000 bottles.
Well, so essentially,
it's not a one-to-one.
And just to add to Luke's question, so when you're doing it, are you actually basing it on full barrels, or are you partially emptying barrels?
No, so essentially we are adding a consistent amount from every barrel,
right,
with a view that then we will empty full barrels into that vatting, and what we'll end up doing is emptying that into 3 IBCs, and then pumping it between the 3 IBCs to get 3,000 litres. But what we find is not every barrel has the same amount in it. Once you empty it, the angels have taken more from one than the other. So we still then, right at the end, once we've blended all of those barrels we thought were going to taste great together, we still then end up doing some adjustment. And so when we first did this original vatting for Hill's Cask, we actually started off with just mainly bourbon and a pairer, and it tasted great when on the bench. And once we emptied all the barrels, tasting it's just a bit flat. It needs something. It needs a little bit of sweetness. It just needs something. And so Ben found this altar wine barrel hiding at the back of the Bond store that was, 3.5 years old in a 225 litre barrel. And we dragged it out and put a sample in there, and it's like, that's it. So out she came, emptied that into this vatting, and that's now the style. So
yeah, wow.
And now the reproducing, it's the hard bit, right? So
yeah. Todd, you're listening to this. It brings back that memory. We did a vatting on the bench, and we came up with something which we were very, very happy with. So then we pulled it together in an IBC, but we didn't use the exact measurements that we used on the bench because we had more in the barrel. So we thought, it'll be all right. We'll put it in. Then we tasted it and compared it to our reference, and it was different. And we spent quite a lot of time, about 6 months actually, chasing the IBC to get somewhere close to what was on the bench. We were very happy with what was on in the end. But that's why I asked the question about, do you base it on you decant your full barrels, or are you left with barrels partially full at the end?
No, look, yeah,
it's a challenge.
It is a real challenge, and you've just got to hope that it tastes good at the end, and if not, you then do some final tweaks. And I guess luckily we've got quite good stocks. I mean, we work bloody hard in the garage, right? And I mean, we managed to produce 40,000 litres of spirit in a 2-car garage, just working Saturday mornings and distilling every night of the week. So by the time we sort of moved out of the garage and now into our current distillery, we've got some good stock there. So yeah, and now we're.
Sorry, I was going to say one of the challenges that I've learned over the years, and talking to other distillers, they say the same thing, is, and how do you manage it? I'd be interested your take on this. Is when you taste something in a barrel and it's on wood, it tastes a certain way. When you pull it out and you put it into a receiver of some sort, it changes. When you add water, it changes. When you vat it together, it changes. When you have it in the bottle and you taste it initially and then leave it for a couple of weeks, it changes. So you're making decisions on pulling vattings together initially on what it tastes like in the barrel, but you know that's ultimately not how it's going to taste when it's in the bottle. So it's an adjustment. How do you handle that process, David?
Well, with a lot of patience. So it really is a bit of a journey over weeks or sometimes months. So sometimes, Ben will pull samples out of the barrels and he'll put them into, little 200 ml bottles and leave them on our lab bench. And they might sit there for a month or more. So it's already had some time to acclimatise to being out of the barrel.
Yeah.
And then when we do a blend or a vatting, we will then sometimes leave them sit, acclimatise in a bottle for another couple of weeks and tasted at different times over those couple of weeks, and and we will have brought it down to 45% and let it acclimatise for a couple of weeks and then taste it. So yeah, look, I think it's just patience. You can't rush these things. You can't just empty it all out of the barrels and do this vatting and then taste it and go, it doesn't taste good, or it tastes great, or whatever, and then quickly jam it in bottles and whack labels on the bottles, because you or your customer is going to be really disappointed. You've got to be patient. Add the water slowly. Just do everything slowly. I think it's one of the things that we've learned is you've just got to be really patient.
You mentioned something a little while ago about you think wine barrels don't work with your spirit.
Well, particularly red wine barrels. I think we've sort of pulled out sort of big red Shiraz barrels out of the Barossa and that sort of stuff, and I just found we ended up with a really tannic whiskey. Maybe we didn't treat the barrels correctly, but yeah, we just didn't like the flavour. We really like the way our spirit particularly works with Chardonnay barrels. We really like the way, we're lucky that we live in the Adelaide Hills, and we've got some great Chardonnay wineries in close reach. Really like the way it works with ex-bourbon barrels, and also some of the fortified. So been particularly happy with some of the barrels we got out of Clare Valley, like the Alta wine barrels or the Liqueur Frontignac barrels. That sort of sweeter style fortifieds has been really nice.
And you're getting them recoopered, toasted, charred. That's
yep.
Yeah.
So yep.
You're not going into wet barrels at all.
No, we haven't got into any wet barrels at all. We have seasoned some of our own barrels and then had them charred afterwards. Right. So we got some white wine barrels fairly out in the piece when we had no money to go and buy or to buy sort of sherry or a pair of barrels, or we just couldn't find a pair of barrels at the time. So we bought a couple of 1,000 litres of a pair and seasoned some barrels for 2.5 years, and then took them back to the cooper to be toasted and charred. Yeah, we haven't done too much of that lately because we've since sort of Steve spends a huge amount of time talking to local winemakers and trying to just find interesting barrels when they're coming available. So he's got this list of probably 150 local winemakers that he talks to every year just to see when they've got interesting barrels coming available. And we just find we have to do that. The barrel market is becoming so tight. And we really like to know the provenance of the barrels. Yeah. So some of the coopers, and I can see Youngie on will tell you the provenance of the barrels, but a lot of them are quite cagey about it, or just quite frankly don't know the provenance of the barrel because they're doing such high volumes that they just don't know where they got their barrels from. So, and I think we just enjoy the working with the local winemakers. It's sort of a bit of all of our suppliers we know really well. So, our malt comes from a barley farmer over on the York Peninsula. He takes all the barley down to Cooper's Malting, who, they've got a state-of-the-art malting facility quite close to our distillery. And then he takes all the malt back over the York Peninsula and silos it for us. But, we can go and stand in the paddock where the barley was grown, and and they're just a great family to deal with. So, if we forget to order malt and which happens every now and again, and we ring him up and go, oh, look, we really want to brew tomorrow, he'll send one of his sons on a ute and bring us a load. It's, if you worked with any other supplier, if you work with any of the big multinationals, you wouldn't get that level of service. So, So, and the winemakers, it's just great to work with them and just get first access to their really interesting and their great barrels, because there is so much demand. And, the guys like Archie Rose now are so big and are drawing on so many barrels from the South Australian market the barrels are just going to get harder and harder to get. So,
well, you mentioned that, and I saw a post on Instagram the other day. I think it was Tim Duckett saying that old wood fortifieds are going to be pushing the $3,000 mark.
wow.
And he said he's not paying that. So if Tim's given up on old wood fortifieds, $3,000. I mean, that's obscene.
That is obscene.
That's absolutely obscene. Question on the barrels: how do you thread the needle with wineries on sulfuring barrels? Because as we know, winemakers will sulfur barrels, depending on what they're doing with it. How do you ensure your barrels aren't sulfured?
Basically, just Steve pesters them around the time he knows they're emptying barrels. So he keeps in touch with them, knows when they're emptying barrels.
Yeah.
We send a truck, or our cooper sends a truck to the winery to pick the barrels up on the day they've been emptied.
Yeah,
they go straight to the cooperage and get the heads pulled off so they can dry out.
Yeah.
So so they don't go volatilic. So yeah, it's literally just a timing thing. So.
Yeah, well, that's a good one. Yeah, I know you're busting.
I'm busting. I want to know.
Go.
I want to know about your cola finish. How that came about.
Oh, look, it was just a bit of a wild idea Steve and I had. I think we'd been drinking too many whiskies one night, and we said, why don't we just try and put some cola in a barrel? And so Steve sat one day and just put, I don't know why he didn't just buy some syrup, but he essentially just got 100 odd bottles of Coke and put it into a 225 litre ex-bourbon barrel and let it sit. That was
a really interesting Coles order.
Yes. And this thing, because the Coke's fizzy, he put the bung in it and it just started oozing Coke out of every orifice. The poor barrel was just, it was horrendous. But anyway, I think the Coke was in there for 5 or 6 months. And then literally we just emptied it out and filled it up with, we'd had 200 litre ex-bourbon barrels that was about 2.5 years old at the time, and just put it into that cola barrel as a finishing barrel. So that was wet filled. Look, it was I wouldn't say it's our best whiskey, but really interesting. It was just something fun to muck around with.
Lark certainly sounds interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say Lark did one with Chinotto, I think it was, and they've actually just released a second one, which the tasting notes look interesting, same as your ones. The tasting notes.
Well, on the palate, burnt caramel, vanilla, fairy floss, and oak.
Finish cola,
cola and coffee. Yeah,
yeah, that's awesome.
So you've added gin into the range as well, and you've got a handful of different gins there. Was gin always in the plan, or?
Oh, look, it was always in my plan. Look, Steve's just a whiskey drinker, so whiskey was in Steve's plan. Gin was always in my plan, and so it took me probably about 18 months to convince Steve that we should put some gin on the market. And I do love drinking gin. Or maybe I just do love drinking, but we just started making some gin. It took us about 12 months or so to get some recipes we were happy with to release. But look, it's been really good to us. It really helped fund a lot of putting whiskey down into barrels. So, and it's given us another whole market. It's interesting. You're talking earlier, Crafty, about doing markets and things like that, I think, before the podcast started.
Yeah.
And we find gin outsells bottles 2-1 for whiskey at the markets.
Yeah.
But whiskey is obviously a bit of a higher price point, so it makes up for, even though it's only selling half as much, it's still 50% of the revenue at markets is whiskey. But gin's a really good seller. And we've found sort of having unusual gins really helps. So people have got too many dry gins in their bar at home, and so by having some interesting ones that have sort of some fairly unique flavors and those sorts of things seem to sell really well. So, so our one called Wild Citrus, which is a really bold mandarin, orange, lime flavor, sells really well just because it is quite different to most of the others on the market.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've had to play around with a few other different ones. We've done a Pinot gin, which was just came out of a friend of mine just up the road in the Piccadilly Valley. Had half a ton of spare Pinot grapes. He said, "Do you want them? Can you do something with them?" And I said, "Oh, it's not enough to turn into brandy. So let's crush them up and add gin to it and see what happens." And we then basket pressed it after it had been macerating for a couple of months, and it turned it into this really nice liqueur gin. So, and that's been selling really well too. So,
now looking at the Wild Citrus that you mentioned a moment ago, one of the botanicals that stood out to me that I haven't seen anywhere else is almond.
Yeah, it was a really unusual one, and I think it comes a bit from Steve's Italian background. He really likes it. Almond liqueurs, and so he said, "Well, I want to put some almond in there." And look, the Wild Citrus was Steve's recipe formulation, so I just let him go with it, and it actually works really well.
Interesting, very interesting. Because we certainly see a lot of the all the classics are in there, but when you look at your other the blue one, I've forgotten what the name is now, where it's all
Sticks and Stones,
Sticks and Stones, very Australian focused. Seeing an almond in there is that is unusual, and I have not seen that anywhere else.
Yeah.
What was your approach to coming up with a recipe with gin? Did you basically do it as individuals, distillates, and then blend them together? Or
yeah, look, we started like that, but got really frustrated with that, and ended up just going, all right, what's some good base botanicals that we think should be in this gin? Put some coriander seed in there, put etc., and sort of just layer it up until we found something that worked really well. And we did that first of all in a little 2-litre lab still, and then made a gin that we felt tasted nice, and then tried to scale that up into a bigger still. We, back in the day, we were using a 50-litre still, and we scaled it up just linearly and found that it actually, the gin that came out of it actually didn't taste anything like the original that we'd distilled in the little 2-litre lab still. And then it was a matter of, okay, what's different about it? Okay, it's got too much, I don't know, cinnamon. So let's do another batch with everything else the same, but with no cinnamon. Blend it together with the one you made before. Okay, what's it taste like now? Okay, it's got too much cardamom. Do another batch without any cardamom. And in the end, after 3 batches, we're actually tweaking more than one botanical at a time. We ended up with something that actually tasted like the original. And we were then able to just go, okay, take that recipe, add the three batches of ingredients together, divide it by 3, and then you've got a single batch recipe then that is repeatable. So, and that sort of worked for us. So, but it was quite tricky sort of scaling that up from your little 1-litre lab still. I mean, back prior to that, we tried to get gin right, just trying to actually do all our experimentations on 20-litre batches, and we ended up with so much cooking gin, you could never use it all, which is when we scaled back to using a little 2-litre lab still. So. But,
looking at your barrel aged as well, I've seen another botanical I haven't seen before. Samphire.
Oh, Samphire.
So that was a really unusual one. So the barrel aged gin's a bit of a funny story. So when we were learning to make gin and doing all these experimental batches, we had quite a few failures, and so we tipped it all into a 44-gallon drum, all the failures. At sort of about a year and a half on, we tasted this bucket of failures, this barrel of failures, and there was about 200 odd litres of it by then. It actually tasted great. it was something that we could never do. We could never reproduce it again.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
it just had all these unusual single distillates and all sorts of unusual things in there. And one of them was samphire. So samphire, we distilled it, and we actually distilled it as a single a single botanical, just to see how it would go. And we just did a small batch of it, so we made 10 liters of it. But after we distilled it, no kidding, it tasted like fish. Like the distillate tasted like fish, and I thought, it's horrible. Tipped it in the 44-gallon drum, but I kept a 200 ml bottle of it and left it sit there for about 3 or 4 months. And I tasted it after 3 or 4 months, and it was the most delicious, crisp distillate. A little bit salty, it tasted like eating samphire. And it's like, damn, I shouldn't have blended that. I shouldn't have chucked it all in.
Yeah,
but,
wow.
it's really really interesting to what comes off the still. Sometimes you just got to let it rest.
Oh, absolutely. I'm just reading up a description of what does samphire taste like, because I've never heard of it and have no idea what it is. And so it says, this is on a BBC Good Food website. Vibrant green stalk, similar to baby asparagus, with a distinctive crisp and salty taste.
Yeah.
I like salt.
I like salt too.
But no, very curious. And how did you find that? It just
I don't know. I think I was watching a cooking show on ABC or something, and the chef was using samphire, and I thought, that sounds delicious. I wonder how that'd work in a spirit. So, ordered some. Well, in fact, I actually went down the beach and picked some, but we won't tell anyone that because it's not legal to harvest. But forage. I mean, yes. But we just managed to get some. I was actually over on a friend's shack at the time, picked some, brought it home, and distilled it. And unfortunately, it was nasty after it was distilled. And because I'm not a seafood eater, so I tasted this spirit, and it's like, ugh. It was horrible.
Wow.
But just
time
give it time.
was good
Just give it time. Yeah.
There you go.
So you would say in putting a gin recipe together, it is very akin to cooking and using botanical and getting that balance right. Yeah.
Very, very much. Yeah. Look, and I'm not a fantastic cook, but I do love playing around with flavors, and I've got a couple of good books that sort of help with flavor combinations and sort of trying to find things that work complementary together that we've referred to at times. It's very much like cooking. But it's funny, some things you distill and they don't taste anything like the raw ingredients. So there's a bit of an art to it. A lot of experimentation and patience.
And that's where the fun comes in.
Yeah, so absolutely. Yeah.
Let's talk about the realities of the industry and what's happening right now. And I'll kick it off by just saying, in the last 2 days, just on Instagram, I've come across 5 new distilleries that I don't know, never heard of them, and every day there's a new distillery opening up. When I started, there was 60 odd distilleries, and there's something like about 400 and something now, 450 odd distilleries now.
Yeah,
it's a great time in Australia. There's a huge boom. There's a huge thirst for new products and that. But are we in danger of being saturated to the point where people will turn around and say, not another one, not another gin, not another whiskey? Where do you think the industry is going, and
maybe
where do we have to be careful?
Yeah, look, I think we do have to be careful because at some point, I mean, at the moment, Australians still drink 90+% of imported spirits. So I think we've still got a long ways to go to try and make a dent in those international imports. But I mean, a lot of that is the big whiskies or the big vodkas and those sorts of things that are taking the lion's share of that. So it's going to be hard to take market share from that until we've got a lot of scale in our distilleries. So, you know, until we've got distilleries that are producing, you know, hundreds of thousands of litres a week, I'm not sure how we're going to be able to compete with the price point of some of the imported whiskies.
Yeah.
Because look, let's face it, there's not everyone that can afford to drink. Well, there's probably only 5 or 10% of Australia that can afford to drink my whiskey. And there's probably only 2% of them that might even want to drink my whiskey and yours or whatever, right? Because, right, I couldn't afford to drink my whiskey until a few years ago, I think. So, you know, we've got to somehow get to that scale where we can actually produce whiskey. Well, we've either got to stick to our niche and you know, be happy with the volumes we're doing, or we've somehow got to scale to a price point that's going to then take market share away from the internationals. And the wine industry did it. And the wine industry did it back in the 70s by essentially, they couldn't get the scale from the Australian market, so they started exporting, you know, beautiful Australian wine into Europe or into Asia or into America. And I guess use the volumes of those other countries, because let's face it, Australia is a very small country.
Yeah.
And so we've got to try and leverage the population of some of the other countries to try and, you know, even if we can only sell to 0.001% of China, it's still bigger than Australia, the Australian market. So, you know, we've got to sort of somehow try and leverage those volumes of export, I think, to help each of us scale to a point where we can then scale our operations where we're price competitive in our own country to try and push out some of the imports.
You know, ideally, we would be more price competitive locally before we have to worry about the exports, and I guess that's an excise issue.
Well, not really though, because the imports pay just as much excise as we do. So, and look, luckily we've got the excise rebate, which has been a fantastic help. So that's let us hire a distiller that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise, and it's let us buy more equipment. So excise in some ways is almost protecting us a little bit, because if you can imagine, if there wasn't excise on our product, you could land a bottle of Johnny Walker in Australia for probably $2 or $3 a bottle. By the time you put it through the wholesale chain, they'd be able to sell it for maybe $15 a bottle, right? There's no way we could come anywhere close to that when it costs us probably $3 or $4 just to put labels and buy the glass, let alone put spirit in there. So in some ways, the excise, I think, actually helps us. I know it's probably a controversial thing to say, but in some ways it sort of actually shields us a little bit. So anyway, look,
if it's used as a blanket, both local and internationals, if there was a import tax on that rather than a excise on the production, that could make it a little fairer locally, while still
very, very hard thing to do though. So unfortunately, putting tariffs on when you've got all these free trade agreements with, you know, the UK and China and those sorts of places. I'm not in
politics.
Yeah, that's right. So unfortunately, the government's fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know, we've negotiated all these free trade agreements, which helps us a lot with our exports, etc. But it makes it very hard to put tariffs on.
One of the things you hear a lot is own your own area, as in, you know, you'll get that local support, right? You'll get those relationships, and it's the way that it went in America with craft brewers, where there was a craft brewer in every suburb, and they had their local support, and they built their local business, which is the opposite of export. But to get established, it is important to own your local area, isn't it? And have an identity. Yeah. So what advice would you give to someone new who's coming into the industry, knows nothing about it?
Make sure you're well funded, and make sure you've got a lot of energy, because you're going to need it. You're going to need both. It is a hard slog. There's no doubt about it. You've got to be super enthusiastic. Get out there and peddle your product. The hardest thing in the world is selling it. Like it's fun. It's super fun making it. It's hard making it, but it's fun. But the selling part is super hard. Just getting traction and getting enough sales of your product to make a living. It really is. So either, try and get a good distributor on board, but distributors are really hard to find. They do take a good chunk of your margin. So make sure you've got a good pricing structure that you can afford to give up the appropriate margins to the retailer and to your distributor.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't baked that in to begin with, then you're going to end up selling a product at a loss, quite frankly, because you've got to make sure you've factored all of that stuff in before you start selling it. Even if you don't start with a distributor, you've got to think ahead and make sure you've priced the distribution into your product. Because whether you use that to hire a salesperson to go and sell your product, or whether you appoint a distributor to go and sell your product into the retailers, either way, you need to price that into your pricing right up front. If you don't, and you go, oh, look, I can undercut the rest and I can sell a bottle of gin for $45. You might be able to, but you haven't left absolutely nothing. By the time you pay excise, put bottles, make your product, you've got nothing left there for the retailer who wants 20%. You've got nothing there for your wholesaler that'll want 20 or 30% sometimes. So, you've got to make sure you factor all of those things into your pricing structure.
Yeah, because if you don't, then you've got to produce more volume.
Or you've got to adjust your price, and customers hate it when you put your price up, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're sort of constantly changing your price or something, but and I know some of the distilleries have done it quite well. They've sort of just every year they just index their price by 3 or 4%, and the customers are happy with that. We haven't done that. We've sort of stuck to the same prices. Yeah.
The market dictates. What? How much importance do you put on relationships with bars? And I'll add to that, there's a high turnover of staff. So you're investing in relationships, but in the hospitality industry, it's changed dramatically since the COVID times. So, yeah, how do you handle the hospitality side of it?
Look, Steve spends a lot of time with the bars here in Adelaide, or he did up until probably 12 months ago. These days, he's just too busy with everything else going on in his life. And we've sort of left it for our distributor to handle all the relationships with the bars.
Right.
Early on, we used to spend a lot of time working with the bars in Adelaide, just because it was easy to, right? They're on our doorstep. You're probably going to drink there anyway, so you go and build a relationship with the Haynes and Co's of the world, and maybe May, and all those whiskey bars around. But these days, to be frank, we're leaving our distributor to build those relationships, and he's selling our products, and he's selling a handful of other products as well. So, and he's got the time to spend. Unfortunately, Steve and I, or fortunately, whichever, Steve and I both still have our day jobs, so we don't have the time to go and spend every night of the week talking to bar owners, etc. So hopefully in the next year or two, we'll be able to give up our day jobs and sort of focus more on promoting our products, etc. But it's been great to actually have young Ben on board as our production manager and distiller to actually make sure we can keep up production, because Steve and I were both getting tired.
So where did Ben come from? Is he in the industry, or has he trained up?
No, he was a young lad. Mate of mine from Alice Springs was coming down to Adelaide, said, oh, can I come and have a look at your distillery? And he said, oh, can I bring my son? And his son came along, with one of his mates. And his mates happened to be this hobby distiller, Ben, and he brought a couple of spirits that he'd made. He brought a gin that he'd made, and he brought a rum that he'd made. And we tasted them and thought, bloody hell, this kid's got some talent. And we just started him off doing bottling, and he'd come and help us mash in sometimes, and just working on weekends where maybe Steve was going to be away for the weekend, and brew day was too big for one person, so I'd get Ben to come around and help. And then when we moved out of my garage and down into the distillery, we got Ben on full time and said, look, I know you're studying. Do you want a job full time? Do you want to just pause your study for a bit and come work full time? And he said, yeah, absolutely. So, and now we give him a bit of time off to study. He was studying winemaking.
Right.
Yeah, right.
But and he comes from a family of winemakers, but he's just super passionate and super smart. So he's the sort of guy who you could put him doing a job and say, look, hey Ben, go label these bottles. Here's how you use the label machine. And most young guys, would have a crack at it, and you'd come back and you'd look and you'd have 1,000 labels put on crooked. He comes back and goes, oh look, I had to adjust the machine because it started putting the labels on crooked, but I noticed it. And by the way, I put these 3 bottles to one side because they had a scratch on them. Great attention to detail, and the guy can fix anything. So he's a country lad. He learned to fix machinery as a young lad. His dad taught him how to do all this stuff. He's built his still at home, all that sort of stuff. So he's absolute gold. We can just set him going.
Careful. Our viewers will probably start trying to.
Yeah, hands off, G. I can.
Yeah, no surnames. No surnames mentioned.
That's right. But yeah.
That's a good segue into a question we've had off the floor.
Yeah.
Which is from a guy called Ryan over in South Africa.
A new viewer. Yeah.
A new viewer.
What's he saying?
Basically, most of us started off by home distilling, which is not necessarily true, but a lot of us have. As a South African home distiller, how could he get himself a job in the Australian distilling industry?
Oh, look, I would suggest just starting to give some distilleries a call. If you're in Adelaide, we'd love to have you on board. We need another person on board now. So, but yeah, I would suggest just starting to give some of your local distilleries a call, or yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Crafty? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, the distilleries, more and more distilleries, more and more expansion. There's demand for people that there's positions opening up left, right, and centre. And a distillery nowadays is not just the distillery; it's the whole thing around the distillery. There's distilleries that have fully fledged bars and events operations and everything else. So it's an attractive industry to get into, and there's lots of opportunities. But yeah, I agree with you, Dave. Pick up the phone, your local distillery, and say, hey, I've got the skill set and I'm keen. What do you reckon? And go from there.
Obviously, a good sample will help.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the thing that attracted us to Ben, right? He brought along good booze, and then after we'd tried his good booze, then we sort of tried him out and just gave him some trial work and just could see how he worked. And whether you like it or not, I mean, most of the distilleries in Australia, 95% or more of all the distilleries in Australia are pretty small businesses, and so you have to be a jack of all trades. So you might be, you've got to be willing to roll your sleeves up, and one day you might be distilling, and another day you'll be brewing, another day you might be whacking labels on bottles and stacking them in boxes. But you go to Lark, you go to even the medium-sized or larger distilleries in Australia, the guy who's distilling is also whacking labels on bottles in a lot of cases.
And milling and going
and milling. Well,
keeping the snakes out of the shed.
That's right.
Yeah.
But one day these distilleries will grow bigger, and you might have a full-time job as a production manager and not have to whack labels on bottles. But for the next few years, unfortunately, you're in at the infancy of some of the small distilleries. Yeah. I mean, look, there's some great courses in distilling in Australia that may legitimise your hobby distilling as well. So, go through one of the IBD courses because although they'll cost you a few bucks, they give you a really good, I guess, theoretical distilling knowledge and a bit of hands-on as well. And I think that will stand well when you ring a distillery and say, I've just completed the IBD course, blah blah blah, or Adelaide University also run a distilling course, and there's a few others around. So if you want to sort of legitimise your hobby distilling, then that might help you as well. Or might give you some other contacts as well, because half the guys that are doing those courses have plans to start a distillery. So, you'll build contacts in the industry through some of these courses as well, which I think you found as well, didn't you, Crafty? You sort of just gradually build your network of Australian distillers through the people you meet.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, surround yourself with good people.
Yeah.
People you can pick up the phone and ask questions and admit things you've done wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about the Australian distilling industry is there's not many people I've found in this industry. You can't just pick up the phone and go, "Hey, I'm having a problem with this. How have you found a way to fix this?" Or, "Hey, I've run out of corks. Can you help me out?" Or, all these sorts of things that people just help each other out. It's a fantastic industry to be a part of.
Yeah,
absolutely.
No, it is.
So we've hit the hour 16 mark.
All right, that's the wrap up time then.
We're trying to
tighten up on time.
The problem is we could go for hours, and that just doesn't translate well into download size. It's a weird thing.
Yes.
So if we have any final questions coming in from the audience before we do wrap it up, I do want to put up, hold on, let me whack up the website again.
Thank you.
Obviously, you can buy everything there, or get a private cask. How many of those? Oh, you get to choose your style and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Your private casks. How many of those have you got down?
Quite a few, probably 40 or 50.
Oh, wow.
And you can even come and fill it. You can even come and distill for the day if you want, while we're just distilling the spirit that's going into your barrel.
Come on, throw Todd under the bus. What does that mean?
I don't know. It could be anything. Could mean
Todd could do the wrap up.
It could be like, oh shit.
Oh yeah, damn.
I don't have them. They're in the bin.
Licenses don't exist anymore, remember?
Yeah.
Just for posterity, we'll bring that up.
Have you got any questions, Todd?
Here we go. We've got a from Jonathan Harris. Very quick. Where to vision from here? So I'm guessing that's what are you seeing? Where do you see the industry going from here?
Or where do you see yourself going? I think
both.
So I think, well, look, from here, for 5nines, I think we're hoping that our recent sort of export expansion is going to help us expand significantly. Actually having some serious volumes of sales starting to come in. We're going to use that to scale our production. So we're not planning to pull any of the money out of the business. We're just going to just use it all as expansion. So use it to fund more whiskey production, get more stock down, get a bigger shed, because our current shed's so full we can't barely drive the forklift in it anymore. And hopefully we can eventually afford the block of land that we've got lined up for our cellar door. So we've got a great spot lined up in the Adelaide Hills. Nice 5-acre block of land on a nice tourist route to build a cellar door, but we just need a bit more money than we've got in our pockets at the moment. So that's where we're heading. We'll keep working on different gins, and just keep enjoying it, and hopefully give up our day jobs so we can actually just focus on this 100%. That'd be awesome.
Hanging out for that one, Crafty. Okay.
You're just hanging out to be actually paid, aren't you?
Well, paid would be good, but yeah.
You can only push a friendship.
You can only, that's it. That's it. That's it. Well, thank you very, very much for joining us this evening. Thank you, everyone, as well, who's chimed in and watching away. I've been a little slack recently. I'm sorry, and I haven't put up all of our most recent episodes.
But you will.
Until today.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Until today.
Yeah.
So a handful of new, I won't say how many because it's embarrassing, but a few new episodes have gone up onto Apple, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon Podcasts, and the website.
And a couple of weeks ago, we chatted with Holly Clintworth from Bass and Flinders, and big congrats to Holly. She's now been nominated, voted in as the next president of the Australian Distillers Association, which is going from strength to strength. So
I've got her angry aunt.
Oh, you got her angry aunt. Yeah.
Angry aunt, good. I like that.
I like it too.
Might finish off with one tonight then.
Oh, we've got a few that we can finish.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Ant may have suffered for the making of that gin.
Yes, ants were harmed.
Well,
please like and subscribe. And what have we got? You're going to say TBA
2
again,
weeks.
Aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're getting into the
final. That'll be the last one. Yeah.
For the year, yeah.
Our Christmas party, so to speak.
Yeah, I think I know who it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got to confirm, don't you?
Yeah.
Of course you do.
Yeah. Anyway, maybe.
And then after that, though, we don't have anything. Okay, so yeah, it is our last for the year.
Yep.
If we can line them up, I say we. If Crafty can line them up, and then that'll be our last for the year.
Cool.
You better do that.
Yeah. We'll sort it out. All right. Thank you again, Dave. Thank you very much.
All right.
Mate. That was
good to chat, guys.
That was good. Good, relaxed,
Great.
chilled, informative. That's what shooting the shit's all about, mate.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
And
All right.
I will continue to enjoy my batch of the VR 001.
Nice. All right. Good
Very
stuff, guys.
We'll see you around.
Thank
Enjoy the rest of your
you
night.
very much.
Cheers. See ya.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.